Okay, and now please let me to introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Rifat Atoun. So Dr. Rifat Atoun is Professor of Global Health Systems and the Director of Health System Innovation Lab at Harvard University. Between 2016 and 2022, he served as the faculty chair of the Harvard Ministerial Leadership Program. In 2008-2012, he was a member of the executive management at the Global Fund as Director of Strategy, Performance, and Evaluation. His research extends globally and focuses on health system performance, health system transformation, and innovation. He has published more than 450 papers in leading journals, including New England Journal of Medicine, Nature Medicine, Lancet, Lancet Oncology, JAMA, and Academy of Management Journal. And in 2020, 2021, and 2022, was recognized as one of the world's most highly cited researchers. Dr. Atoun has advised many governments around the world on health system reforms and acts as a consultant advisor to the World Bank, WHO, and leading health and technology companies. In 2019-2020, Professor Atoun was a senior advisor to the G20 presidents, and in 2021-2022 was the co-chair of the G20 T20 Task Force of Global Health Security and COVID-19 for the G20 Indonesian presidency. He was a member of the US National Academy of Medicine Committee on Health Systems and the advisory board of WHO Research Center for Health Development in Japan, the Norwegian Research Council Program for Global Health Research, and the UK Medical Research Council Global Health Group. He is a member of the Longitude Prize Committee and a founder and board chair of Movement Health 2030, a Swiss foundation that supports innovation aimed at solving major global health challenges. He's founding president of the Global Surgery Foundation based in Geneva. Please let me join Professor Rifat Atoun. Welcome.
A very good morning to you all. It's an immense privilege and pleasure to be here, distinguished guests and dear colleagues in this beautiful historic city of Sevilla in Andalusia. I'm going to talk about sustainable HTAi for sustainable health systems. There was a very ominous statement in your title, a turning point for HTAi. I think it's a turning point for the better. I'm going to briefly talk about health systems. In order to talk about sustainability, we need to have a shared understanding of health systems and the shared understanding of sustainability. Then I'm going to share with you some empirical evidence on how health systems are performing, or not, as the case might be, and then make a conclusion on their sustainability. And then the third part of my presentation is the role of HTAi, in helping develop sustainable health systems. So I take a systems view of health systems. That might be surprising to you, but actually many models of health systems have sort of input, output, outcome models. But it's very important to think of health systems as interlinked systems that are dynamic, that are complex, that are changing, and they're part of a broad changing context. And typically, as policymakers, we have three functions to modify: governance and organization of the system. We have financing of the system. Third, resource generation and management. And these are used to generate a set of outputs at individual level, individual health services, and public health services, both individual subpopulations and populations. But a very important consideration as policymakers is to ensure that these outputs are effective, cost-effective, they're delivered efficiently, they're equitable, and they're responsive. They're responsive to the changing context and to expectations of citizens. In turn, these outputs produce a set of outcomes at systems level. These are improving health, improving financial protection, and improving user satisfaction, both the level, average level, but also the distribution among the population. So a sustainable system is one that produces cost-effective services and delivers them in an efficient way, so that results in value for money, but also produces these outputs in a way that is equitable, but also responsive to the changing context and resilient to the changing context, and in line with citizen expectations. And that generates value for many. And I was very encouraged to hear the authorities from Spain and Andalusia talk about equity as a major principle of their health systems. So responsiveness to the changing context and resilience to these changes on an ongoing basis leads to or produces sustainability. So in systems thinking, any system that is able to respond to external shocks or rapid changes and are resilient to ongoing changes are sustainable. So those that can demonstrate responsiveness and resilience are sustainable health systems, or sustainable systems generally. So if we use this as a departure point for understanding sustainable health systems, then we can begin to measure whether systems are sustainable or whether systems exhibit evidence of sustainability. So we can look at if health systems are responding to shocks, external shocks, contextual changes, or if they're resilient to these changes. So let me explain to this in more detail with some empirical evidence of the work we've been doing for more than 30 years to try and understand health system performance and sustainability. So first of all, very important to understand that health systems do not operate in isolation. They're part of a broad context, an ever-changing context. So for example, demographic changes. We have aging with higher levels of individuals with cognitive and physical decline. Demographic transition leads to epidemiological transition that produces chronic illness, but very importantly, multimorbidity. More than 2 chronic conditions simultaneously in an individual. But another important epidemiological transition we're experiencing is widening inequalities around the world. And that's a huge risk for sustainability of health systems. Then, of course, there are political changes in many countries around us. And we see increased evidence of populism, which leads to suboptimal decisions in relation to resource allocation, but also targeting of investments. There are legal and regulatory changes. These are changes beyond health policies. For example, regulations regarding data laws that impact health systems, or changes in trade agreements that are leading, at the moment, increasing cross-border flows of data, funding, healthcare, and demand for services. Then there are economic changes. In the European context, and also in many countries, there's high inflation, there are low economic growth, that leads to fiscal constraints, and there's also the green economy transition. So countries are trying to manage their economies to adjust to this new reality. What COVID-19 did was really unmask the sociocultural expectations of citizens. We're seeing increasing levels of polarization. These dots you see here, actually, these are networks. You talked about networks. These are networks that talk to each other on social media. Whereas in the past, it was more of a homogeneous mass. Now we have 2 polar opposites. We have one group and we have another group. And we are seeing increasing levels of distrust in science, as well as polarization of different groups. And on top of that, we have environmental degradation that's leading to zoonoses and emergence of new diseases. And finally, a source of optimism, technology. There is incredible renaissance in science. So we have technological innovation, we have convergence of science that's leading to production of new diagnostics, new medicines, new therapeutics, and new solutions for healthcare. So let's have a look at how health systems health systems are responding to just two of these contextual shifts, epidemiological and technological, within the context of economic constraints, where there's fiscal pressures to reduce investment in health sector. So first, I'm going to look at the resilience. How are systems responding to epidemiological transition over time? So this has been happening over decades, as opposed to an external shock that's happening suddenly. This is a study I had the privilege of leading that looked at emergence of, diabetes, management of diabetes in sub-Saharan Africa. It was the Lancet Diabetes and Endocrinology Commission. Here we use data from 12 countries, national representative surveys with individual level data, with biomarkers, to understand what proportion of individuals with diabetes had ever had their glucose measured, they were aware of their diagnosis, they were given advice, or they were actually provided treatment. And what we found was that among this population, out of every 100 individuals, just 50% ever had their glucose measured, 37% were aware of their diagnosis, just 17% received advice, and only 11% received treatment. And of course, a smaller number achieved control. We extended this study. We set forward to identify national representative surveys with biomarkers that could be used to pull data. Typically, these are step surveys that are led by WHO. And this paper published in PLOS Medicine, we pulled data from 28 low and middle income countries for which data were accessible to us. And what we found was very surprising. Of every 100 individuals with type 2 diabetes, that is, 64% are detected, only 48% are diagnosed, less than 1 in 2, 45% are treated, but just 30% achieve control. There's no shortage of diagnostics or medicines in many of these countries, but the control levels are low. So the systems are not resilient to changes in epidemiology of one of the commonest conditions. Then we extended our data set even further. We started looking at hypertension, which is the commonest chronic condition. And I present here data by world regions. We were able to pull data from 44 low and middle income countries. And let me just use Latin America, which is the next venue for your HTAi meeting, as an example. And each dot is a country. And you can see CRI at the top. That's Costa Rica, which I'll come back to. So here in Latin America, we see a very interesting picture because of every 100 individuals with hypertension, around 90% have their blood pressure measured. So measurement takes place. But then around 60%, less than 60% are diagnosed. And then around 50% are treated, and only 25 to 30% achieve control. When I present these data in Chile, I have my good friend here from Chile, and also from Brazil, they say, this cannot be true. I said, look, I'm only presenting to you the data that you provide to me. So this is an objective analysis of pooled data that is nationally representative. Of course, the picture in other world regions are even worse. In South and East Asia, and the data set includes India, for example, and sub-Saharan Africa, where the control levels are below 10%. So if we think about the health system and the effectiveness objective in relation to the outputs produced, we're not achieving effectiveness. Are we achieving efficiency? Well, answer is no. Again, this is the same data, quite busy slides, so I hope you've had your coffee this morning. So if you could look at every single dot is a country, then we have a best fit sort of regression, which is the straight line. Then we have the gray area, which is the 95% uncertainty intervals. And here we present each country by, on the x-axis, GDP per capita, and on the y-axis, performance in relation to percentage of individuals managed at each step. And we start with ever measured, then diagnosed, then treated, then controlled. And we can see, and let's have a look at this country here, which is Costa Rica. So Costa Rica is outperforming all other countries. And if we move to diagnose, we can see again, Costa Rica is an outlier, performing better than others. If we look at treated, we can say again, the number of countries achieving treatment are now below 50%, including 95% uncertainty intervals. And if we move to control, you can see most countries are, again, below 30%. So if we use Costa Rica as the efficiency frontier, all the countries are actually far away from that efficiency frontier. So the countries are not achieving effectiveness of the outputs produced, we're not achieving control, but also they're not efficient because they're far away from the efficiency frontier, which is Costa Rica. And I wish I had data from Andalusia, from Catalonia, and also Basque Country. I'm sure they would be high performers here. So not doing well in relation to effectiveness, not doing well in relation to efficiency. How are systems doing in relation to equity? Whereas the earlier papers were published in The Lancet, we managed to get this paper published actually very recently in Nature Medicine. There's huge interest in system performance at the moment. So here we present hypertension care cascade with a larger data set by wealth, quintile, and country income groups. So here we have for low income, for low middle income, and upper middle income countries. And here we have wealth quintiles from Q1, which is the poorest wealth quintile, to Q5, which is the richest income quintile. And you can see that at every step, and here we have awareness, treated, and controlled, there's a gradient. Yes? So not only is there a gradient between low-income countries and upper middle-income countries do better, so there is an inequality in relation to performance in higher income countries, but there are also within country differences. And let's have a look at upper middle income countries where you can see a real gradient in relation to awareness, treated, and controlled. So we're also not achieving equity objectives. We can see a real gradient in relation to the system outputs benefiting higher income groups as opposed to those that are low income. You might say, but these are low and middle income countries. But actually, we see a similar picture in high income countries. And interestingly, we could not get pool data from high income countries. But I present here data which, from a paper we published in The Lancet, which were used by the World Health Organization to inform the Global Diabetes Compact targets. And what we found was quite surprising to us. So I've highlighted a few high-income countries, including sort of Germany, Finland. You can see there are many countries where individuals that have type 2 diabetes who are diagnosed, in many countries the levels are below 80%. And in a large number of countries, including Finland and Singapore, the levels are actually below 50%. So this is not just a feature for low and middle income countries. This is also a feature of high income countries. And we're using diabetes as a tracer, which is a common condition among many different sort of income groups. So systems are not being resilient to the contextual shifts. But have they been responsive to shocks, epidemiological shocks? And here we use, again, we have many studies, but I want to present to you aggregate data. These are OECD data, looking at what has happened to avoidable mortality. This is preventable and treatable deaths per 100,000 population in G7 and selected countries. And what we can see is that avoidable mortality has increased very substantially following COVID-19. So when COVID-19 hit health systems, systems were not able to respond in an effective and efficient way. And we can see in some countries that the uptick is very, very high. So these are sort of Mexico and Peru, countries where there are large inequalities. And we show in more detailed studies in Brazil that actually inequality is the main reason for the differences observed in treatment as well as health outcomes. So not being responsive, not being able to resilient to contextual shifts, but also not being able to respond to contextual changes, shocks, such as COVID-19. So as a result, average life expectancy is beginning to decline. Again, this is using the latest data from OECD, from selected G7 countries and others. You can see that after 2019, average life expectancy at birth has declined. Some countries are able to recover, but others not. But I want to point out two countries, the UK and US. UK has a national health system. Everyone has access to healthcare, free of charge at the point of delivery, and US is a very different system, as you know. In the US, which spends more than any other country in the world, the decline in average life expectancy began well before COVID-19, 2014. So there was a glacial decline that was observed, then a very sharp decline, and the US has not been able to recover. And there's a huge divergence compared to peer countries with similar income levels. Similarly, in the UK, the levels, average life expectancy began to decline before COVID-19. Then there was a sharp drop after COVID-19. Again, these are the latest available data, but we'd like to see what happens next. So, what's happening to health expenditure? With these contextual changes, health expenditures are actually increasing in all countries. And again, I want to point out the US, which is a complete outlier, whereas the performance is actually sloping downwards very rapidly. The healthcare expenditure in the US are very high, 18% of GDP, but actually increasing. But in all countries, after COVID-19, health expenditures have increased. And there's a new equilibrium established at a far higher level than what IMF and OECD had projected. So, systems are under pressure. More is going in, less is going out. Is that sustainable? No, it's not a difficult exam question. It's not sustainable. Using the definition we had as the departure point, systems have not been able to respond to contextual shifts, and I've only shared with you two contextual shifts, yes? And they have not been resilient to ongoing insults to the system. So there's a big threat. Systems are not sustainable. But I see this as an opportunity. I'm an optimist. And I see an opportunity for health technology assessment in ensuring sustainable health system. How so? Well, fixing unsustainable health systems. HTAi to rescue. You all have a very, very important role, in my view, as a health systems person. First of all, I use technology, definition of technology in a broad sense. Hard technologies, not just medicines, but also diagnostics, other health technologies, but also soft technologies that are very important in shaping health systems. But we have an innovation challenge. We have what I call asymmetric innovation. We have a real renaissance in relation to diagnostics, vaccines, health technologies, medicines, but on the delivery side, health system delivery has not changed very much, literally for centuries. So we have more of these incredible innovations going into health systems that are clearly not fit for purpose. So we're not able to realize the benefits of these innovations after they're introduced into health systems. And I think that's important for HTAi, because HTAi should be not the endpoint for approving the use of a technology. It should be actually the beginning with follow-up of what happens to these technologies when they're introduced into health systems, to see if they do realize, as predicted, the value that they are supposed to generate. So throughout the whole life cycle of the innovation, from the conception, from the generation, and from implementation. But we're seeing more and more complex innovations requiring ongoing assessments at every level of the organism. From genomic, we have gene therapy. Proteomics, we have highly targeted personalized therapies emerging. We have cellular therapy at cell level. At tissue level, we have regenerative medicine. At organ level, we have many organ transplants, of course, but also now with microbiome. And at system level, we're seeing complex innovations, for example, brain, spine organ interfaces to manage individuals with transaction of the spine. But there are many other there are many other complex technologies and solutions that are emerging. These are just illustrative examples. So we have new solutions emerging that require different ways of assessment and ongoing assessment to see actually what happens when these innovations are introduced into the system to ensure that the delivery systems are ready and are able to adopt and diffuse these innovations to realize the value that they're supposed to. And there are a number of major transitions that require health technology assessment to take a new form and new shape. We're transitioning from analog to digital, and digital data is going to be very important in terms of pulling data, in terms of analytics, but also we have emergence of digital therapeutics, digital diagnostics, and other digital tools that are going to really transform healthcare delivery. We're moving from generalized interventions or generalized medicines to highly personalized medicines. Simultaneously, we're also moving from individual level interventions to population level interventions with targeting of subpopulation groups. We're also transitioning from increasing use of self-learning automated systems with the application of machine learning and AI, and not just human inputs into decision-making and management. And we're transitioning from less complex therapy to highly complex multimodal solutions. So HTAi need to transition to managing these complex solutions that are emerging. But we have a challenge because the institutional logic in health systems are actually not helping innovation, adoption, and diffusion. On the one hand, we have industrial policies, and including in the EU, that encourage innovation. But on the whole, health policies are designed to constrain adoption of innovations because of immediate pressures on budgets. And economic policies do not take into account adequately contribution of health innovations and health systems to the broad economy. And a lot of the emphasis is actually on short-term budgetary cost rather than the long-term health, economic, and societal benefits or returns of investing in new technologies and innovation. So HTAi can help shape or can change this institutional logic, which is going to be critically important to convince policymakers. So we need to demonstrate that investing in new technologies, and I'm using innovation as a broad umbrella term, generates improved economic returns by better outcomes and reducing cost of illness, but also there are important human capital and productivity gains that need to be quantified, and there are then broader contributions, what we call spillover effects in adjacent economies beyond health sector. Every research and development job created in the health sector, or every job created in the health sector creates additional jobs in adjacent sectors and economies. So we're not measuring the value generated in a way. The boundaries we use when we use evaluations are actually too narrow. We take a too narrow health services perspective. So what can HTAi do? Well, HTAi can actually transition from being seen as gatekeepers of technology to actually system shapers. I mean, that word is very important. Shaping systems, not just introducing technologies, but ensuring that the systems are fit for purpose to realize the desirable outputs that are effective, that are delivered efficiently, that are equitable, and that are responsive to external shocks, that are resilient to these changes, but that are also in line with societal and citizen expectations. So HTAi enable innovation throughout the innovation cycle. This ongoing assessment can help introduce solutions to improve agility of systems, to demonstrate greater responsiveness, and to bolster resilience, to produce sustainability. More effective and efficient services that generate value for money, and more equitable and responsive services that generate value for many. So HTAi can help transitioning from the current performance, which is suboptimal and fairly varied across countries, shifting everything to the right over time, but actually with higher performance level and also reducing variation. But that requires a new emphasis for HTAi. So in terms of innovations, rather than actually applying HTAi just here, at the introduction of innovations, applying HTAi throughout the life cycle in the adoption of innovations in health systems and diffusion or expansion of innovations or technologies at scale to ensure that everyone benefits. And with the digital transition, with the new methods, analytic methods, with machine learning and AI, we're able to undertake almost real-time assessment of what goes on with technologies, so that what has been demonstrated in a randomized control trial, when a technology is introduced into a health system, we're able to demonstrate that it works. It works effectively, it works efficiently, it achieves equity, and it achieves responsiveness to ensure that we're able to generate value for money and also value for many. And I cannot think of a better group of individuals than yourselves to help shape health systems, transitioning from just priority setting to gatekeeping to being system shapers. Thank you very much for your attention.